Some stories feel like they only belong in novels, too dramatic to ever be real. And yet, sometimes life throws situations at us that are stranger than fiction. This is the story of a man who had everything money could buy: wealth, power, influence, prestige. But there was still one thing missing from his life, something that money alone couldn't seem to give him: a child. Our main character's name is Alexander Carter, 45 years old. To the outside world, Alexander was the perfect example of success. He was one of the most powerful real estate moguls in the city, someone who could change entire neighborhoods with the stroke of a pen. People often said, if there's land left with value, you can be sure Alexander has a stake in it. His fortune was in the billions. He lived in a sprawling hilltop mansion with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, and his garage was lined with exotic cars, sleek Italian sports models, German engineering marvels, even a limited-edition vintage classic or two. Whenever Alexander walked into a gala, all the flashing lights of cameras turned toward him. He was the man everyone envied: sharp suits, a commanding presence, and a reputation for closing deals no one else could. But behind that image of control and confidence, there was a hollow space in his heart that nothing could fill. Alexander had been married twice. The first marriage ended in betrayal, something he never spoke about, but which left a scar so deep that it shaped the way he saw love forever after. His second marriage was supposed to be the redemption, the new chance at building a family, but even that crumbled under differences too wide to bridge. After 2 heartbreaks, Alexander came to a cold conclusion. Love was nothing but an illusion, a distraction filled with lies and disappointments. And yet, the desire for a child, his own bloodline, never left him. For Alexander, a child was not just a baby. It was legacy. It was continuity. It was someone to carry forward his empire, someone to give meaning to the decades of ambition and work he had poured into building his fortune. He didn't want his empire to scatter into the hands of strangers after he was gone. No, he wanted his name, his legacy, his dynasty to endure. That's when the idea took shape. It was bold, some would call it cold, even ruthless. But for Alexander it was logical. He would pay a woman to carry his child. There would be no romance, no strings attached, no messy entanglements. Just a contract, a clear agreement, signed and sealed, in which the woman would give birth to his heir. And when it was over, she would walk away, and the child would stay with him, clean, efficient, just like any other business deal he had ever orchestrated. That night, Alexander drove his black convertible through the city streets. The neon glow reflected off the polished surface of his car as he cruised past rows of bars, restaurants, and flickering billboards. The city was alive, buzzing with noise and lights, but inside his head, Alexander was consumed by only one thought: finding the right woman. As he slowed at a red light downtown, his sharp eyes caught something unusual on the sidewalk. There, sitting cross-legged against the cold stone wall, was a young woman. She wasn't begging, she wasn't calling out for help, she was sketching. On a crumpled piece of paper, with a pencil worn down nearly to the nub, she drew with a concentration so fierce it seemed like the rest of the chaotic city didn't exist. Her hair was dark and tangled, falling loosely across her face. Her clothes were worn thin, the kind you recognize instantly as being slept in for too many nights on the streets. And yet, despite it all, there was something undeniably captivating about her. Her eyes, large, deep and startlingly bright, were focused on her drawing. They carried a spark, a quiet resilience that shone even through the exhaustion written on her face. Her name was Emily Rivers, 23 years old, homeless, forgotten by society, overlooked by strangers rushing past her every day. But there she sat, pouring what little she had into her art, clinging to something beautiful in a life filled with struggle. Alexander's first instinct was to dismiss the thought. What are you doing staring at some homeless girl? She has nothing to do with your plan. But even as he tried to shake the thought, his gaze lingered. There was a strange pull he couldn't explain. The traffic light turned green, horns blared from behind, impatient drivers demanding he move. Alexander blinked, gripped the steering wheel, and pressed the accelerator. His car roared forward, leaving the girl and her sketch behind. But as he drove, the image wouldn't leave his mind. Her thin fingers clutching that pencil, the determination in her eyes, the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing, but still refused to let go of her humanity. Back at his mansion later that night, Alexander sat in his study. The room was filled with rare books and priceless art pieces he had collected over the years. A glass of aged scotch sat untouched on his desk. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered, alive and restless. Yet in the silence of his home, Alexander felt nothing but emptiness. And then, like a whisper in the back of his mind, her image returned. Emily Rivers, the girl on the sidewalk. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. Maybe, he murmured to himself, maybe she's the one. The next morning, Alexander Carter woke up earlier than usual. He wasn't a man who often allowed distractions into his mind. Discipline was one of the reasons he had risen to the top. Normally, his days followed strict schedules: a workout at 6, breakfast at 7, calls with investors at 8. But today was different. As he stood by the tall windows of his bedroom, coffee cup in hand, he found himself staring out at the skyline without really seeing it. Instead, his mind kept circling back to that girl, the one from the sidewalk, the one with the eyes that refused to leave his memory. Emily Rivers. He didn't even know her name yet, but in his mind, she already had one. Alexander tried to shake it off. This is ridiculous. You're letting sentiment creep in. You need someone healthy, discreet, reliable, someone who can carry a pregnancy without complications, not some starving girl on the street. But even as he thought it, he remembered the way she had been drawing, not begging, not broken drawing, creating, holding on to something, even when she had nothing. By midday, Alexander found himself giving in to his curiosity. Instead of heading straight to his office, he told his driver to take a detour downtown. He wanted to see if she was still there. Sure enough, when the car rolled up to the same corner, there she was, sitting in the same spot, knees tucked to her chest, sketchpad balanced carefully. The world rushed by her in waves of footsteps and traffic noise, but Emily was lost in her own world of pencil strokes. Alexander's sleek black car stood out like a predator in the urban jungle. A few passers-by slowed down to look, curious about who might step out, but Alexander stayed inside, watching her through the tinted window. He studied her face, the determination etched into it. Finally, he gave the order, "Stop the car." The driver obeyed immediately, pulling up by the curb. Alexander opened the door and stepped out, his polished leather shoes clicking against the pavement. Heads turned. Men in tailored suits rarely stopped at corners like this. Emily looked up, startled. For a moment, her hand froze on the paper. She blinked at the tall man standing in front of her. Sharp jawline, expensive suit, the kind of presence that practically screamed wealth and authority. He didn't belong here. "Do you sell your drawings?" Alexander asked, his voice calm but commanding. Emily hesitated. No one had ever asked her that before. People usually walked past without even glancing down. Slowly, she lifted the piece of paper. It was a rough sketch of the street itself, the lamppost, the cars, even the faces of people who had rushed by. Somehow, she had captured life in motion with just a dull pencil. "It's not finished," she said softly. Her voice was quiet, but not timid. Alexander studied the lines. There was talent there, not polished, not professional, but raw and alive. He pulled out his wallet and handed her a $100 bill. Emily's eyes widened. "For this?" she asked, almost disbelieving. "For this," Alexander confirmed, slipping the sketch carefully into his hand. He could feel her confusion, her suspicion. No one gave money away without a reason. "You don't have to," she began, but Alexander cut her off. "I want it, that's all." And then, without another word, he turned and stepped back into his car. The door shut, the engine roared, and in seconds he was gone. Emily sat frozen, staring at the bill in her hand. Her heart pounded. $100 was more than she usually saw in a month. She clutched it tightly, unsure whether to cry or laugh. For Alexander, the encounter was just the beginning. Back in his office later that day, he couldn't stop looking at the sketch. It wasn't just lines on paper. It was proof of something deeper: resilience, creativity, a refusal to be crushed. And that's when the thought struck him again. Maybe she could do it. Maybe she's the one. Of course there were complications. Emily was homeless. She didn't have access to proper health care, didn't have stability. But Alexander had resources. He could give her everything she needed for the pregnancy: housing, food, medical care. All she had to do was agree. The question was, would she? For the next few days, Alexander found excuses to pass by that corner. Each time, Emily was there, sometimes sketching, sometimes simply watching the world pass her by. They exchanged brief words, a nod, a glance, a polite thank you when he handed her another bill for another piece of paper filled with pencil strokes. Slowly, trust began to build. Finally, on the 5th day, Alexander decided it was time. He stepped out of the car once again, but this time, instead of leaving quickly, he crouched down to meet her eye level. "Emily," he said. She froze. "How do you know my name?" "You signed your drawing," he replied, pulling out the sketch she had sold him 2 days earlier. At the corner of the page, in small letters, was her name. Emily looked at him warily. "What do you want?" Alexander took a breath. This was not a business pitch he could deliver in a boardroom. This was something entirely different. "I want to make you an offer," he said. His tone was steady, but his heart beat just a little faster. "An offer that could change your life." Emily narrowed her eyes. "What kind of offer?" And there, on that busy street corner, with the noise of traffic and chatter swirling around them, Alexander prepared to tell her the truth. For a man like Alexander Carter, words were weapons. He knew how to use them to bend rivals in negotiations, to close deals worth millions, to convince entire boards of directors to follow his vision. But standing in front of Emily Rivers, crouched on a dirty sidewalk, he felt strangely cautious. This wasn't a boardroom, and she wasn't a business executive. Her eyes studied him closely, suspicious, guarded, but also curious. She wasn't used to people like him stopping to talk, let alone making offers. Alexander straightened, brushed invisible dust from his suit, and then sat down on the edge of the curb. The driver, alarmed, instinctively moved to intervene, but Alexander waved him off. This was something he needed to do himself. "I'm not here to trick you," he began slowly. "I'm here because I see something in you. Determination, strength. You're different. It is not sided, not follies." Emily gave a short, dry laugh. "Different? I'm sitting on a sidewalk, drawing on scraps of paper. I'm not sure that's the kind of different anyone wants to be." Alexander didn't flinch. "It's exactly the kind of different that matters. You could be lying here with a cardboard sign, begging, but you're not. You're creating. You're surviving. That tells me you don't give up easily." She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "Why are you telling me this? What do you really want?" For a moment, Alexander hesitated. Then he decided to stop circling and go straight to the point. "I want you to have my child." The words hung in the air between them like a thunderclap. Emily blinked. She wasn't sure if she had heard correctly. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Alexander said, his voice steady, as if he were discussing a business plan. "I want you to carry my child. I'll pay you. I'll give you everything you need: housing, food, medical care, security. You won't want for anything. All I ask is that you agree to this arrangement." Emily's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. A rush of confusion, disbelief, and even fear surged through her. Was this man insane? Or was this some cruel joke? "You're serious," she whispered. "Deadly serious," Alexander replied. "I've thought this through. I don't want marriage, I don't want complications. I want an heir, a child, and I think you can do it." Emily stared at him, then shook her head, almost laughing at the absurdity. "You don't even know me. I could be sick. I could be—" "I'll have doctors examine you," Alexander interrupted smoothly. "If you're not fit, we'll know. But I've looked at you, Emily. You're young, strong. You've survived things most people never could. That's exactly the kind of resilience I want in the mother of my child." Her hands tightened around her sketchpad. The words sounded clinical, almost cold, yet the intensity in his eyes told her he wasn't mocking her. He was serious, completely serious. "And what happens to me?" she asked quietly. "After? I'd be life not with her." Alexander's expression softened just slightly. "After, you'll have money, enough to change your life forever. You won't have to live on the streets again. You'll be free to pursue whatever you want, your art, your dreams, your future. You'll walk away better than you started." Emily's heart pounded. It was insane. It was outrageous. And yet, a tiny, dangerous part of her whispered, "What if he's telling the truth? What if this is your chance?" Still, she shook her head. "This sounds like selling myself." "No," Alexander corrected firmly. "This isn't selling yourself. This is making a choice, a contract between two people. You get security, stability, freedom. I get the one thing money alone can't buy." Emily didn't respond. She hugged her knees, staring down at the pavement. Alexander knew better than to push too hard. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a sleek black card, and placed it gently on top of her sketchpad. "My number," he said. "Think about it. If you decide to hear more, call me. If not, I'll never bother you again." And with that, he stood, adjusted his cufflinks, and walked back to the car. The door closed, the engine growled, and in moments, he was gone. Emily sat there, frozen, the card heavy in her hand. Alexander Carter. The name itself felt powerful, intimidating. She stared at the digits printed in silver ink, her mind spinning. Could she? Should she? The idea both terrified and intrigued her. That night, Emily lay curled in her blanket beneath the overpass she often used for shelter. She clutched the card tightly, unable to sleep. Visions swirled in her mind, visions of warm meals, of a bed, of safety, things she hadn't had in years, but also visions of a child, a life growing inside her, tied forever to a man she barely knew. By sunrise, she still hadn't made a decision. But deep down, Emily knew one thing. Her life would never be the same again. Emily Rivers didn't call Alexander Carter the next day, or the day after. The card stayed hidden inside the folds of her worn backpack, tucked between a half-empty notebook and a broken pencil. She told herself she wouldn't even think about it, but the truth was, the offer haunted her every waking moment. She tried to keep her routine the same. Morning coffee from a church shelter, sketching in the park when the light was good, watching people hurry past with their lives packed neatly in briefcases and smartphones. But now, every passing stroller, every parent holding a child's hand, sent a pang through her chest. Alexander's words echoed in her mind. "You get security, stability, freedom. I get the one thing money alone can't buy." He said, directly reprising the second place of one to a lifeless of Colt and one to about. It sounded almost reasonable when he said it, like he was just proposing another business transaction. But Emily knew what it really meant. 9 months of carrying a child that wouldn't be hers. 9 months of surrendering her body, her time, her choices. Was any amount of money worth that? Still, she couldn't ignore the temptation. Her stomach growled constantly these days. Meals were scarce, and winter was creeping closer with its biting winds. The idea of safety, real safety, was something she hadn't allowed herself to dream about in years. 3 days passed. 4. 5. By the 6th day, she cracked. Emily found herself sitting on a borrowed phone in the corner of a laundromat, Alexander's card trembling in her hand. She dialed the number, half hoping no one would answer. But the line clicked almost immediately. "Emily," Alexander's deep voice said, calm and assured, as if he'd been expecting her call all along. She froze. "How did you have a distinctive way of hesitating before speaking," he said smoothly. "I knew it was you." Emily frowned. The man unnerved her. I'm not saying yes. I just want to hear more about what you're really offering." "That's all I ask," Alexander replied. "Meet me tomorrow, 10 o'clock. I'll send a car." And just like that, the conversation ended. The next morning, Emily almost backed out a dozen times. When a sleek black SUV pulled up near her corner, her first instinct was to run. But something kept her rooted in place. Curiosity, maybe, or desperation. The driver opened the door politely, and Emily climbed in, clutching her backpack like a shield. The car smelled of leather and cedarwood polish, so far from the stench of gasoline and damp concrete she was used to. She sat stiffly, barely breathing, until the car rolled through iron gates and up a long, winding driveway. Then she saw it. Alexander's mansion. It wasn't just a house, it was an empire of glass and stone, sprawling across the hillside, with fountains in the front and manicured gardens that seemed to stretch forever. Emily's jaw slackened. She had never seen anything like it except in magazines. The driver led her inside, through marble hallways lined with priceless art. Finally, she entered a sunlit room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Alexander stood there, waiting. He looked as impeccable as ever in a tailored suit, his posture confident, his gaze sharp. Yet there was a subtle smile on his lips when he saw her, something that felt almost welcoming. "Emily," he greeted, "I'm glad you came. Is it light to the Saints way?" He stayed to the Saints weather grid. She folded her arms, trying to steady her nerves. "I'm not agreeing to anything. I want to understand." "Of course," Alexander said, gesturing to a seat. A maid appeared silently, placing a tray of food, eggs, toast, fruit, juice in front of her. Emily's stomach twisted painfully at the smell, but she forced herself to sit without touching it. Alexander took a seat across from her, steepling his fingers. "What I'm offering is simple. I will pay you a significant sum of money. In exchange, you will carry my child. You will receive full medical care, housing, food, anything you need. You won't be abandoned or left alone during the process. When the child is born, he or she will be mine, and you will walk away, free to live your life however you choose." Emily chewed her lip. "And how much money are we talking about?" Alexander named a number so large that Emily nearly choked on her breath. It was enough to buy an apartment, enough to go to school, enough to erase years of struggle in one stroke, but that only made her more suspicious. "Why me?" she asked bluntly. "You could hire someone, a professional. There are clinics, surrogates." "Because I don't want someone who's in it for the money alone," Alexander interrupted. "I want someone with grit, someone who knows how to fight when life gets hard." "That's you," he said, "for the bread it is loss, and stupida, my presid. Said it is Warland." She was no taken. Emily stared at him, stunned. No one had ever described her that way before. Grit, strength, resilience. To most people, she was just another failure cluttering the sidewalks. "You're insane," she muttered. "Perhaps," Alexander said with a faint smile, "but I get what I want." For a long time, silence stretched between them. Emily stared out the window at the glittering skyline. Alexander simply watched her, patient, unhurried. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know if I can do this." "You don't have to decide now," Alexander said. "Take your time. But know this, Emily, opportunities like this don't come twice." She looked down at the untouched plate of food. Her stomach growled again, and before she could stop herself, she picked up the toast. Alexander said nothing, but the small smile in his eyes deepened. For the first time in years, Emily felt both terrified and strangely alive. She had no idea if she was walking into a trap or a miracle, but one thing was certain. She was standing at the edge of a decision that could change everything. The decision gnawed at Emily like a shadow that refused to leave. After that meeting in Alexander's mansion, she returned to her usual spot downtown, but nothing felt the same anymore. The streets seemed harsher, the cold more biting, the hunger in her belly sharper than ever. She looked at people in suits rushing to their jobs, and for the first time, she wondered if she might actually step into a different life. But then the doubts returned. Carry his child? For money? What kind of person would that make me? At night, she tossed and turned under the overpass, hugging her backpack like a lifeline. She thought of the warm food she had eaten at Alexander's home, the clean air, the silence of those giant windows overlooking the city. She thought of the number he had whispered, the amount of money that could rewrite her future. Yet she also thought of the price. 9 months. A baby she would never call her own. A child who might grow up never knowing who she was. The conflict ate her alive. Meanwhile, Alexander Carter was not a man accustomed to waiting. In his world, hesitation was weakness. Deals closed because he pushed them through, because he controlled the pace. But with Emily, he found himself strangely patient. He had told her to take her time, and he meant it. Still, each day he caught himself wondering, would she call? Would she disappear? In his study, he placed her sketches side by side on the desk. Each drawing was different streets, faces, little fragments of the world around her, but together they painted a picture of someone who refused to be erased, someone who insisted on leaving a mark, no matter how fragile her circumstances were. He admired that, perhaps more than he should. 2 weeks passed. Emily still hadn't given him an answer. She survived on scraps, avoiding his number, but the thought never left her. Sometimes she hated herself for even considering it. Other times, she hated herself for not already saying yes. Finally, one evening, as the sky burned orange over the city, Emily made a decision. She dialed his number. When Alexander's voice answered, calm and steady, she whispered, "I'll do it." He steadily like as Nova grided. There was no triumph in his tone, no gloating, just a simple, "Good. Tomorrow morning, my driver will come for you." The next day, Emily found herself sitting once more in the leather seat of the SUV. Her backpack sat on her lap, stuffed with everything she owned. She kept staring out the window as the car wound through the gates of Alexander's estate. This time, she didn't go to the sunlit room. Instead, the driver escorted her to a sleek, modern office where Alexander was waiting with 2 other people. One was a woman in her 50s, dressed in a tailored grey suit, carrying a folder of papers. The other was a doctor in a white coat. "Emily," Alexander said warmly, "this is Margaret, my lawyer, and Dr. Patel, who will oversee your health during this process. Emily's throat tightened. This was real. Too real. The lawyer opened her folder and slid a thick contract across the polished desk. This agreement outlines the arrangement in detail. You will receive full housing, medical care, and a stipend during the pregnancy. Upon delivery, custody of the child will transfer entirely to Mr. Carter. In return, you will receive the agreed-upon payment. Emily's eyes scanned the pages, but the legal language blurred together. Words like custody, liability, non-disclosure swam before her. Alexander leaned forward, his tone soft but commanding. Everything is here. No tricks, no hidden clauses. You'll be taken care of, Emily. I give you my word. Her hands shook as she picked up the pen. For a long time she hovered over the paper, heart hammering. Then, with one deep breath, she signed her name. That night, Emily didn't return to her corner on the street. Instead, she was shown to a guest room in Alexander's mansion. It was larger than any place she had ever stayed. The bed was soft, the sheets smelled of lavender, and the bathroom gleamed with marble tiles. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her reflection in the tall mirror. What have I done? She thought. Her hand drifted to her stomach. Nothing had changed yet, but everything would. Alexander, meanwhile, stood in his study, gazing out at the glittering skyline. His reflection in the glass looked calm, but inside, he felt something stir. He had secured deals worth millions without blinking. He had crushed rivals, built skyscrapers, reshaped the city. But this was different. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profit or power. He was thinking about legacy, about a child who would bear his name, and about the girl sleeping in his house, the girl who had nothing, yet had just agreed to give him everything. He poured himself a glass of scotch, lifted it slightly in a silent toast, and whispered, "To the future." The first week in Alexander Carter's mansion felt like Emily had stumbled into a dream she wasn't supposed to touch. She woke up in a bed that seemed to hug her body, wrapped in sheets softer than anything she had ever known. Breakfast appeared at her door every morning. Eggs, fresh fruit, warm bread, and coffee that smelled rich and alive. She showered in hot water until her skin tingled, wrapped herself in fluffy towels, and stood staring at the reflection in the mirror as if trying to recognize herself. But no matter how clean she became, how fed, how rested, her eyes always reminded her of where she had come from. There was a shadow there, something that whispered, "This isn't yours. Don't get used to it." Dr. Patel visited twice that week. A kind, sharp-eyed woman, she guided Emily through medical tests, blood work, and scans to ensure her body was ready. Emily tried to stay calm, but the sterile smell of hospitals, the cold instruments against her skin, it all made her uneasy. "You're in good health," Dr. Patel told her with a reassuring smile. "You'll be monitored regularly. You won't be alone in this." Emily nodded silently, clutching the edge of her chair. After each appointment, Alexander would check in briefly, not hovering, not sentimental, but always present. "How was it?" he'd ask, his deep voice steady. "Fine," Emily would mutter. "Good." Then he'd simply nod and move on, like it was a meeting concluded. Yet there was something in his eyes whenever he looked at her. Not affection exactly, but focus. As though she wasn't just a person, she was the centerpiece of something that mattered deeply to him. One evening, as Emily wandered the halls of the mansion, she found herself pausing in front of a series of portraits. They were oil paintings, heavy with gold frames, depicting stern men and elegant women in period clothing. The Carters, she realized. Generations of them, legacies carved into canvas. She stood there, staring at faces that all seemed to share Alexander's sharp jaw and commanding eyes. "You're studying my ancestors," came Alexander's voice behind her. Emily jumped, turning to see him in a dark suit, a glass of wine in hand. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged not just in the room, but in every room. "They look important," Emily said awkwardly. "They were," Alexander replied, stepping beside her. Each one added to what the Carter name means. Power, endurance, influence. His eyes narrowed slightly, and yet not one of them left behind what truly mattered. Family that lasted. Emily swallowed. "And that's what this is about for you? Legacy?" Alexander didn't answer right away. He sipped his wine, his gaze fixed on a portrait of a man who looked particularly severe. "Finally," he said, "when I'm gone, the buildings I built will stand. But they won't carry my blood. My name will echo, but without a voice to continue it, it fades." Emily hesitated. Then softly, she said. "And you think I'm the answer?" Alexander turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I think you're stronger than you realize, and strength is what carries bloodlines forward." For a moment, Emily felt the weight of his words settle over her. She wasn't just some desperate girl anymore. In his eyes, she was something vital. But that scared her more than anything. Days passed. Emily began to adjust to the rhythm of life inside the mansion. She had her own room, her own schedule, even a small art studio Alexander had arranged for her after noticing her sketches. "It's important you feel grounded," he had said, almost as if he hated admitting he cared. She spent hours there, painting the gardens, the city skyline, even fragments of dreams she couldn't put into words. It gave her peace in the middle of the storm building inside her. But the nights were different. At night, doubt clawed at her. She'd sit on the balcony, staring at the city lights below, wondering if she had made a mistake. She would press a hand to her stomach and whisper, "What am I doing?" Sometimes she imagined a child with Alexander's eyes staring back at her. Other times she imagined herself walking away afterward, her hands empty, her heart shattered. Could she survive that? One night, Alexander found her on the balcony. "You should be resting," he said. Emily gave a humorless laugh. "Hard to rest when you're about to change your entire life." He studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you regret signing?" Emily hesitated. "I don't know yet." "That's honest," Alexander said simply. He leaned against the railing beside her, his presence steady, almost comforting. "Regret is easy. Doubt is natural. But choices define us. You've made one. Now you have to own it." Emily glanced at him. "You make it sound so simple." "It is," Alexander replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I built my empire on simple choices. Do it or don't. Win or lose. The rest is just noise." She shook her head. "Not everything is business." His lips curved faintly. "No, some things matter more." Their eyes met, and for the first time, Emily saw something flicker behind his composure. Not calculation, not ambition, something else, something almost human. It scared her more than his power ever did. That night, when Emily returned to bed, she lay awake long after the mansion had gone quiet. Her mind kept replaying Alexander's words, his eyes, his voice. She had thought this arrangement was about money, about survival. But slowly, dangerously, it was becoming something else. And Emily didn't know if she was ready for what that meant. The day everything officially began arrived with an uneasy silence. Emily sat in the back of the black SUV once again, her palms damp against her knees. This time, they weren't headed to the mansion. The car wound its way through the city and stopped at a discreet, private medical clinic tucked between two gleaming office towers. The driver opened the door, and Emily stepped out, her backpack clutched tightly. Inside, the clinic was hushed and immaculate, the kind of place where even the air smelled expensive. The receptionist greeted Alexander by name, offering a respectful nod before leading them down a polished corridor. Emily's stomach twisted. Every step made her decision feel heavier. In the procedure room, Dr. Patel explained everything carefully, her tone calm and patient. "This will be a medical implantation," she said. "We've already gone through your tests, Emily. You're a healthy candidate. It's safe, and I'll be with you every step." Emily nodded numbly. Her heart thundered in her chest as she lay back on the cushioned chair. Alexander stood near the window, his arms folded, his gaze sharp as ever. He didn't speak, didn't touch her, but she could feel the weight of his presence. "Are you ready?" Dr. Patel asked gently. Emily's voice shook. I think so." "Remember," Alexander said suddenly, his voice low, steady, and commanding, "this is the beginning. The choice you made wasn't small, Emily, but it was the right one." She met his eyes, searching for reassurance. For once, she found a flicker of it there. Then the procedure began. Hours later, when it was over, Emily sat quietly in the recovery room. Her body felt different, not painful, but heavy, as if it understood what had been set in motion. Alexander appeared at her side, his suit jacket removed, his sleeves rolled up. It was the first time she had seen him look less than perfectly composed. "How do you feel?" he asked. Emily gave a shaky laugh. "Like I just signed up for the strangest job in the world." For a brief moment, Alexander's lips twitched, almost a smile. "You'll be fine. You sound very sure of that," she murmured. "I am," he said simply, "because I don't make choices that fail." Emily rolled her eyes, but deep down, his certainty steadied her. Back at the mansion, she was instructed to rest. Nurses checked on her, Meals were brought to her room, and for the first time in her life, Emily was told she didn't need to worry about anything. But Emily was a worrier by nature. She lay awake night after night, her hand resting on her abdomen, whispering questions into the dark. What will this child be like? Will they know me? Will they hate me for giving them away? And beneath it all, what will happen to me once it's done? Alexander watched her from a distance. He told himself it was just about ensuring success, monitoring the arrangement, making sure Emily didn't falter. But there was more to it. He found himself pausing outside her studio, listening to the scratch of her pencil against paper. He found himself standing a little longer in the doorway when she laughed at something the maid said. He found himself asking Dr. Patel too many questions about her health. It unsettled him. Alexander Carter didn't care about people. People were assets, partners, or obstacles. They fit into neat boxes. But Emily refused to fit. And that infuriated him almost as much as it fascinated him. One evening, weeks into the process, Emily stood in the garden under the glow of lantern lights. The air was cool, the flowers heavy with night fragrance. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the stars. "You shouldn't be outside this late." Alexander's voice came from behind her. She turned, startled. He stood in the shadows, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened. "Could say the same to you," she replied. He stepped closer, his presence filling the space around her. "I couldn't sleep." Emily raised an eyebrow. "The great Alexander Carter losing sleep? What's the world coming to?" His lips curved faintly. "Don't get used to it." For a moment, they simply stood there, the silence thick between them. Then Emily whispered, "Do you ever think about it? About the child?" Alexander's eyes darkened. "Every day." "What do you imagine?" she asked softly. He hesitated. For once, his answer wasn't calculated. "Someone who will carry my name. Someone who won't have to claw their way through life the way I did. Someone better." Emily studied him in the lantern light, and for the first time, she saw not the ruthless businessman but the boy he must have once been. A boy who had wanted something more. Her heart ached in a way she hadn't expected. She looked away quickly. "I should rest." Alexander nodded, his mask sliding back into place. "Yes, rest." But as she walked past him, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something between them had shifted. Something neither of them was ready to name. The days blended into weeks, and Emily's life took on a rhythm that was both foreign and strangely comforting. Morning sunlight spilled into her room through wide glass windows. She would eat breakfast on the balcony, eggs, fruit, fresh bread, sometimes sketching the gardens below as the maids trimmed hedges with perfect precision. Dr. Patel visited regularly, always calm, always professional, assuring Emily that everything was progressing as it should. And yet, despite the calm, Emily couldn't escape the storm inside her. She was carrying Alexander Carter's future. The thought was terrifying, exhilarating, and unbearable all at once. One afternoon, she wandered into the library, a cavernous room lined floor to ceiling, with books that smelled of old leather and secrets. She ran her fingers along the spines, titles she'd never heard of: philosophy, economics, art history, ancient politics. Alexander found her there, perched on a ladder, tilting her head to read the top shelf. "You'll fall," he said smoothly from below. Emily startled, glancing down. "I've been climbing things since I was 5. "Relax." He raised a brow. 5? What could you possibly have been climbing at that age? She smirked faintly. "Fire escapes, dumpsters, whatever got me a better view of the world. The May June is the Tennel Fiver, he pricing left of the mighting sea. The Reverend Midas the left of the might of the Seist." Something flickered in his expression, something close to respect. "Adapting to survive," Alexander murmured. "That's what makes you different." Emily rolled her eyes. "Different isn't always good." "For me, it is," he replied simply. The way he said it sent a strange shiver through her. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, sketchbook in her lap, drawing the outlines of a child she had never seen. Sometimes the baby had Alexander's piercing eyes, other times her own wild curls. She snapped the notebook shut, pressing her forehead against it. "Don't get attached," she whispered to herself. "This isn't yours. And to the doys of the pans and the fans of the brive, and to the plans so minds of the soam, the fans that can down." But the words felt hollow. Meanwhile, Alexander wrestled with something he didn't want to name. He told himself it was control he needed to ensure everything went smoothly, that Emily stayed healthy, that the arrangement didn't falter. But deep down, he knew it was more. He found himself drawn to her presence, her laughter, even her silences. He lingered in rooms after she left. He memorized the sound of her pencil scratching across paper. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to matter. And yet, she did. One evening, during dinner, Emily finally broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder," she asked carefully, "if this will mess me up? I mean handing over a baby like it's a business deal." Alexander set down his fork, his eyes locked onto hers, steady and unyielding. "You knew what you agreed to." "I know," she said quickly. "I'm not backing out. I think about it, that's all." For a moment, Alexander said nothing, then his voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "You won't walk away empty. You'll have a future, a better one than the streets ever offered you." Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to say money couldn't fix everything, but the truth was, he wasn't wrong. Still, she couldn't shake the fear that money wouldn't erase the ache of letting go. A few days later, she was in the art studio, sketching the gardens again, when Alexander entered without knocking. "Busy?" he asked. Emily looked up, arching a brow. "You don't strike me as the type to care if I'm busy." A faint smirk tugged at his lips. "Fair enough." He stepped closer, glancing at the sketch on her easel. "You captured the roses well." "You know about roses?" she teased. "I know about everything I own," he replied smoothly. Then, after a pause, he added, "But you see things differently. You draw not just what's there, but what it feels like." He said dot mirrors so setting in the den. The compliment caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, but no words came. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the air charged with something neither wanted to acknowledge. Finally, Alexander stepped back, his mask slipping back into place. "Dinner is in an hour," he said briskly, then left. Emily stared after him, her heart pounding. That night, she dreamed of a child running through those gardens, laughter ringing like bells. But in the dream, when she reached out to hold the child, Alexander was already there, lifting them into his arms, walking away, leaving Emily behind in the shadows. She woke up with tears on her face. The weeks rolled forward, the changes in Emily's body becoming impossible to ignore. Dr. Patel reassured her that everything was normal, but each new sensation made the reality sink deeper. She was carrying life. One afternoon, as she rested in the garden, she pressed her hand to her stomach and whispered, "Hey, little one, I don't know what to call you. I don't even know if I should be talking to you, but I hope you'll be loved, even if it's not by me." She didn't notice Alexander watching from the terrace, his expression unreadable, his chest tight with something he refused to name. In the mansion, the air began to feel heavier, as though both of them sensed the storm building between them. Emily had thought this arrangement would be simple: 9 months, a child, money, freedom. But now, as her connection to the baby grew and her bond with Alexander deepened in unspoken ways, nothing felt simple anymore. She was caught in something far bigger than herself, something that scared her and thrilled her all at once. And Emily couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was coming next would change everything forever. By the time the second trimester settled in, Emily Rivers no longer needed reminders that her life had changed. Her body told her every day. Her genes no longer fit. Her energy fluctuated between bursts of creativity and overwhelming exhaustion. Some mornings she stared into the mirror, brushing her curls back, touching her stomach with a mixture of awe and dread. The mansion's staff adjusted effortlessly around her. Meals tailored to her diet appeared at exact times. Herbal teas arrived at her bedside before she even asked. Alexander's resources ensured she lacked for nothing. But despite the comfort, Emily sometimes felt trapped like a bird in a gilded cage. She wasn't used to silence. On the streets, life was noisy, cars honking, footsteps rushing, voices yelling. In the mansion, the quiet could feel suffocating, so she filled it with art. Her studio walls became covered in drawings, gardens, the city skyline, abstract swirls of emotion she couldn't put into words. Most recently, she had started sketching children, not the child inside her specifically, but children playing, laughing, holding hands. When Alexander walked in one afternoon and saw the sketches, his eyes lingered on them. "You're imagining," he said quietly. Emily stiffened. "Is that a problem?" "No." He stepped closer, his gaze sharp. "It's unexpected." She crossed her arms. "What did you think would happen? That I'd go through this like a machine?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he said, "No, I thought you'd surprise me, and you have." His honesty unsettled her more than his coldness ever did. The pregnancy brought new complications. Emily's emotions swung like a pendulum. Some days she felt strong and hopeful. Other days she cried alone in her room, wondering if she'd made a mistake. Dr. Patel was supportive, offering both medical advice and gentle encouragement. But Emily noticed something she couldn't ignore. Alexander had started to change too. He checked on her more often, not intrusively, but consistently. He noticed when she looked tired, when she skipped meals, when she pushed herself too hard in the studio. Once, after she nearly fainted in the garden, Alexander had rushed to her side faster than anyone else. His hand gripped her arm, his voice sharp but edged with panic. "You have to take care of yourself, Emily. Not just for you, for them." The way he said it, the intensity in his eyes, sent a chill through her. One evening, Emily found herself in the dining hall with Alexander, the table set with flickering candles. It wasn't a planned dinner. He had simply appeared, and somehow they ended up sharing the meal. "You don't talk about your family," Emily said suddenly. Alexander's fork froze mid-air. Slowly, he set it down. "That's because there's nothing to talk about. Everyone has family," Emily pressed. "Not me," he said flatly. "Not anymore." She frowned. "What happened?" His jaw tightened. For a moment, Emily thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice quieter than she'd ever heard from him, he said, "My father cared about empire. My mother cared about appearances. Neither cared about me. When they died, the only thing they left me was a name. So I built it into something greater. Have I said volcans of the mind?" Emily studied him, her chest aching. "And now you want a child to fix what they didn't give you?" Huh? Alexander's eyes snapped to hers, steel flashing in them. "I want a child who will never feel what I felt. A child who will never be disposable." The rawness in his voice silenced her. For the first time, Emily realized this wasn't just about legacy. It was about wounds that still bled inside him, and it terrified her because part of her wanted to heal them. Weeks passed. Emily grew heavier, slower, but also more protective. She found herself talking to the baby when no one was around. Sometimes she sang quietly, songs she remembered from childhood. One afternoon, as she sat on the balcony humming, Alexander appeared in the doorway. "You're singing," he observed. Emily blushed. "You make it sound like a crime." His lips twitched faintly. "No, it suits you." He stepped closer, his gaze falling to her stomach. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "Can I?" Emily blinked. "Can you what?" His eyes met hers. "Feel." Her breath caught. She hesitated, then slowly nodded. Alexander moved closer, kneeling beside her chair. He placed his hand gently against her stomach, his usually steady expression breaking for just a second as he felt the faintest movement. Something shifted in the air between them. Alexander Carter, the man who commanded boardrooms, who crushed rivals without blinking, looked vulnerable, human. Emily's chest tightened painfully. She whispered, "This isn't just business anymore, is it?" His eyes lifted to hers, and for once he didn't hide. No, it never was. That night, Emily lay awake, replaying the moment over and over, the warmth of his hand, the look in his eyes, the words he had spoken, and she realized with a sinking heart that she was in far deeper than she had ever intended. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about Alexander. It was about a child. It was about something terrifyingly close to love, and Emily had no idea how to survive it. By the time Emily entered her 6th month, everything felt heavier, her body, her thoughts, her emotions. The mansion had become both a sanctuary and a prison. She was safe, fed, cared for, but also trapped inside walls that seemed to watch her every move. The child growing inside her was no longer an idea, no longer a distant future. It was real. Every flutter, every kick, reminded her of the responsibility she had taken on. Sometimes the movements filled her with wonder. Other times they filled her with dread, because the closer the due date came, the closer she was to losing what she was beginning to love. Alexander's presence had grown more constant. At first, Emily thought it was just his controlling nature. He wanted to monitor progress, ensure nothing went wrong. But she started to notice the subtle things, how he lingered at the doorway of her studio longer than necessary, how he softened his tone when speaking to her, how his eyes rested on her stomach, with something far more complicated than ambition. One evening, after dinner, Emily confronted him. "Why are you always around?" she asked, her voice sharp with both suspicion and curiosity. Alexander didn't flinch. Because this matters. You mean the child matters? His jaw tightened. Yes, and so do you. Emily's breath caught. She wanted to dismiss his words, laugh them off as manipulation, but his eyes told a different story. She turned away before he could see the turmoil in her face. Dr. Patel continued her regular visits. One afternoon, after a routine check, she pulled Emily aside. "You're doing well," she said kindly, "but I can see the stress in you. You need to take care of your heart, not just your body." Emily forced a smile. "Hard to relax when your whole life is upside down." Dr. Patel's gaze softened. "I've worked with many women, Emily. Most go into this thinking it's just about biology, but it's never just that. It's emotional, too. You're not weak for feeling more than you expected." Emily swallowed hard. What if I don't want to let go?" The doctor didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "That's a question you'll have to face, but not alone." Her eyes flicked toward Alexander, who was waiting just outside the room. Emily's heart pounded. That night, Emily dreamed again. She saw herself in the mansion garden, a little boy with Alexander's sharp blue eyes running into her arms. She lifted him, kissed his forehead, felt his small hands clutch her hair. But when she turned, Alexander was there, holding out his arms. The boy leaned toward him, and Emily felt him slip from her grasp. She woke up sobbing, clutching her stomach. The fear of losing the child was beginning to consume her. One rainy evening, Emily stood by the window, watching droplets race down the glass. The storm outside seemed to mirror the one inside her. Alexander entered quietly, setting a glass of warm milk on the table beside her. "You'll need sleep," he said. Emily glanced at him, startled. "You brought me milk?" He shrugged. "Dr. Patel said it helps." For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then, softly, she asked, "Why are you being like this?" "Like what?" "Kind, caring, human." His jaw flexed. "Because I don't want you to hate me." The honesty of the words knocked the breath from her chest. She whispered, "And what if I don't?" Their eyes locked, the air between them heavy with something unspoken, something dangerous. Alexander's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then, that changes everything." Emily's heart thundered so loudly she thought he might hear it. But before either of them could move, the thunder outside cracked, breaking the moment. Alexander turned away first, his mask snapping back into place. "Rest," he said briskly, and left the room. Emily stood frozen, her hands trembling, her chest aching with confusion. The next morning, she couldn't stop thinking about it. His words, his eyes, the way he had almost looked, vulnerable. She had built her life on mistrusting people, on keeping walls up to survive. But with Alexander, those walls were cracking, and that terrified her more than hunger, more than the streets, more than anything she had faced before. Because she wasn't just afraid of him anymore. She was afraid of what she was beginning to feel for him. Later that week, as she painted in the studio, Alexander walked in again. But this time, he didn't say anything. He just watched. Emily pretended not to notice, focusing on the canvas. Her brush strokes grew bolder, more chaotic, until finally she slammed the brush down. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" she demanded. Alexander didn't move. His voice was low, deliberate. "Because you're not who I thought you were. You're more." Emily's chest tightened painfully. "And what am I supposed to do with that?" she whispered. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the storm in his eyes. "You don't have to do anything. Just don't run from it." Her heart pounded. For a split second, she wanted to lean into him, to let go of the fear and fall. But then, she remembered the contract, the arrangement, the fact that the child inside her wasn't hers to keep. She stepped back, her voice trembling. "I can't. Not when I know how this ends." Alexander's expression darkened, but not with anger, something far more painful. He gave a curt nod, turned, and left the studio without another word. Emily sank into the chair, tears burning her eyes, because she wasn't sure if she had just saved herself or broken something she could never repair. The seasons began to shift. The mansion's gardens that had once bloomed with vibrant colors now carried the fading hues of autumn. Leaves scattered across stone pathways, crunching underfoot, while the air grew cooler, sharper. Emily felt the change in more ways than one. Her body was heavier, her steps slower, her hands instinctively cradling her growing belly as though to shield it from the chill. But the real weight was inside her chest. Every day brought her closer to the birth, and every day she struggled with the truth, that once the baby arrived, she might be forced to let go. Alexander noticed her distance. He wasn't oblivious, he never was. His sharp eyes saw too much, even the things she tried to hide. "You're pulling away," he said one morning as they sat across from each other at breakfast. Emily kept her gaze fixed on her plate. "I'm protecting myself." From what?" "From you," she whispered. The silence that followed was heavy, stretching like a rope between them. When Emily finally looked up, she was startled by what she saw in his expression. Not anger, not irritation, hurt. Later that day, Dr. Patel visited again. After the examination, she lingered, speaking to Emily privately. "You're healthy. The baby is healthy. That's the good news," the doctor said warmly. Then her tone softened. "But you look torn, like there's a battle inside you." Emily let out a shaky laugh. "That obvious? I've seen it before," Dr. Patel replied gently. "Carrying a child for someone else is never just physical. It's emotional, and sometimes emotions don't follow contracts." Emily bit her lip, eyes stinging. "I don't know what to do," I promised. "You promised when you thought this would be simple," the doctor interrupted. "But it's not simple anymore, is it?" Emily shook her head, tears spilling over. Dr. Patel placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens, remember this. You are not just a vessel. You are a person, and what you feel matters. Well and never grave." She was confounded. The words stayed with Emily long after the doctor left. That night, she wandered into the garden despite the cold. She needed air, space, something to clear her racing thoughts. Alexander found her there, standing beneath the skeletal branches of a once blooming tree. "You'll catch a chill," he said quietly, draping his coat over her shoulders before she could protest. Emily closed her eyes, breathing in the faint scent of cedar that clung to the fabric. "Why do you do that?" she asked. "Do what?" "Act like you don't care, then turn around and do something that proves you do." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Because caring has consequences." "He has not. Only as safe of safe. Times of the potential to price poorly." Her eyes searched his face. "And what if I told you I don't want to be just a consequence?" For the first time, Alexander looked shaken. His mask slipped, revealing something raw and unguarded. He stepped closer, his voice low. "Then you'd be the first person who ever wanted more than what I could give." "However," Emily's chest ached. She whispered, "maybe you've had more to give all along. You just never trusted anyone enough to try." The silence between them was charged, fragile, and painfully intimate. Then Alexander did something Emily never expected. He reached out not with the commanding grip she was used to, but gently, hesitantly, and brushed his fingers against hers. It was such a small gesture, but it felt monumental. The following days blurred together. Emily and Alexander didn't speak openly about what was happening between them, but the shift was undeniable. He lingered longer during meals. She caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, and she, despite her better judgment, began to crave his presence. One evening, as they sat near the fireplace, Emily finally voiced the fear that had been consuming her. "What happens after?" she asked softly. Alexander didn't pretend not to understand. His expression grew hard, conflicted. "After the child is born?" "Yes, avidly." He stared into the fire, the orange glow flickering against his sharp features. "I don't know," he admitted. Emily's heart twisted. "You've planned everything in your life down to the last detail, and now you don't know?" His eyes met hers, intense and vulnerable all at once. "Because for the first time, the outcome isn't something I can control. Not without hurting you." The honesty in his voice left her breathless. That night, Emily dreamed again. But this time, the dream was different. She wasn't in the garden. She was in a hospital room, cradling a newborn wrapped in a blanket. She felt the warmth, the weight, the fragile heartbeat against her chest. And then Alexander walked in. His eyes softened as he reached for the child. Emily hesitated, torn between holding on and letting go. When she finally handed the baby to him, she felt a piece of herself break away. She woke up sobbing, clutching her stomach protectively. For the first time, she admitted to herself what she had been avoiding all along. She didn't just want to carry the child. She wanted to keep the child. The realization haunted her for days. She painted less, slept less, wandered the mansion halls like a ghost. Alexander noticed. Of course he did. One evening, he cornered her gently in the library, his voice firm but concerned. "Something's wrong. Tell me." Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to lie, to brush it off. But the words spilled out anyway. "I don't know if I can give the baby up." The room fell silent. Alexander's expression froze, unreadable. Emily's heart raced as she continued, tears streaming down her cheeks. I know what we agreed to. I know what I signed. But it doesn't feel like a contract anymore. It feels like this baby is a part of me. And I can't, her voice broke, I can't let go. For the first time since she had met him, Alexander looked completely unprepared, his usual composure shattered. He whispered, almost to himself, I didn't expect this. Emily searched his face desperately. Then what happens now? Alexander didn't answer. His silence was more terrifying than anger, more suffocating than rejection, because in that moment, Emily realized the future of not just the baby but her heart hung entirely in his hands. The tension in the mansion became almost unbearable after Emily's confession. Every room she entered seemed to hold its breath. The staff carried on with their duties, but even they sensed the shift. Alexander, once so composed and predictable, had grown restless. He spent longer hours in his study, pored over documents without focus, and paced the halls at night like a man haunted. And Emily, she was caught in the storm she herself had unleashed. Days stretched into weeks. Her belly grew larger, her movements slower, but her determination sharper. She no longer tried to hide how she felt. Whenever Alexander's eyes lingered on her stomach, she held his gaze, silently daring him to acknowledge the truth. This child was not just his, it was theirs. One afternoon, Emily sat in her studio, staring at a half-finished painting. It was supposed to be a garden scene, bright and full of life, but she couldn't bring herself to finish it. Instead, she dragged the brush through dark shades of grey and blue until the canvas was a storm. She didn't hear Alexander enter until he spoke. Your paintings have changed, he said quietly. Emily's chest tightened. So have I. He moved closer, his presence filling the room. You're afraid. She turned sharply, eyes blazing. Of course I'm afraid. I'm carrying a child that I'm supposed to give up to a man who doesn't even know if he wants me around after it's over. Tell me, Alexander, how am I supposed to feel? The words cracked in the air like thunder. For a moment, she thought he would lash back, but he didn't. Instead, his voice was low, almost broken. You think I don't ask myself the same questions every day? Emily blinked, stunned. He stepped closer, his eyes burning with conflict. I thought this was simple, a transaction. But nothing about you is simple, Emily. You've made me want things I promised myself I'd never need. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might drown out his words. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay awake, one hand resting on her stomach, the other clenching the sheets. The baby kicked, a small but undeniable reminder of what was coming. She whispered softly into the darkness, I don't know how to let you go. Unbeknownst to her, Alexander was awake too in his study, staring at a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. The storm inside him mirrored hers. He had built empires, crushed competitors, carved his name into history. But now, for the first time, he was powerless, because power couldn't decide the future of his child, or the woman carrying it. A week later, Dr. Patel scheduled an ultrasound. Emily lay on the bed, gel cool against her skin, as the doctor guided the device. The room filled with the sound of a heartbeat, strong, steady, alive. Emily's eyes blurred with tears. Alexander stood nearby, frozen, his gaze fixed on the screen. For the first time, he saw the outline of his child, the tiny hands, the curve of a spine, the undeniable proof of life. Something inside him cracked. Without thinking, he reached for Emily's hand. She flinched at first, then let him hold it. Neither of them spoke, but the silence was louder than words. Later that evening, Alexander found her on the balcony. The city lights glittered below, a reminder of the world beyond their walls. I saw you cry today, he said softly. Emily stiffened. So, it moved me. His voice was rough, uneven. I didn't think I could be moved anymore. How have mice reside, and id fivelis with a brive, and with the abundance 40 with 5. She turned to face him, her eyes shining. You think this is just about you. This baby is mine too. And when you talk about contracts and legacy, you forget that. I don't forget, he said sharply. Then, softer, I just don't know what to do about it. For once, Alexander Carter, the man who always had an answer, looked utterly lost. Emily's breath caught. Then maybe we figure it out together. The suggestion hung in the cold night air, fragile but full of possibility. From that night on, something shifted between them. It wasn't a declaration, not yet, but the walls they had both built were cracking. Alexander no longer hovered like a watchman. He lingered like a companion, He asked her about her dreams, her fears, her past. He listened, truly listened, and Emily, against all odds, began to let him in. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Emily told him about her childhood, the small apartment, the constant struggle, the way her parents' love was drowned out by poverty. "I learned early not to expect much from life," she admitted. "It was easier to survive that way." Alexander's jaw tightened. No child should grow up like that. She smiled sadly. "That's why this baby means so much. Because maybe they can have what I didn't." "The Grimaus pounding Sid is now founding Fiveder. So the Grimaus bands." His eyes softened, a rare vulnerability flickering through them. "They will. I'll make sure of it." Emily's heart twisted, because part of her wanted to believe him, and part of her already did. But with hope came fear. The closer they grew, the more terrified Emily became of what would happen when the baby arrived. Would Alexander shut her out? Would he take the child and send her away? Or would he keep her? The uncertainty gnawed at her, even as her feelings for him deepened. One night, unable to sleep, Emily found herself wandering the halls. She ended up outside Alexander's study. Light spilled from under the door. She hesitated, then knocked softly. "Come in," his voice called. Inside, he sat behind his massive desk, papers scattered around him, but he wasn't working. He was staring at a photograph, a rare glimpse of the past. Emily stepped closer. "What's that?" He hesitated, then turned the photo toward her. It was of a boy, young Alexander, with eyes too old for his face. "My father gave me this when I was 10, he said quietly. "Told me to remember that I carried his name, that everything I did had to be worthy of it." Emily's chest ached. "That's a lot for a child." "It was a burden," he admitted, "and I swore I would never do the same to my own child. I wanted better." For the first time, she saw not the billionaire, not the businessman, but the boy who had been left to build himself from ashes. She whispered, "Maybe that's why you need me. Not just for the baby, but for you." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and to her shock, Alexander didn't deny it. He just looked at her with something dangerously close to longing. That night, as Emily lay in bed, she realized the truth she had been avoiding. This wasn't just a story about a homeless woman and a millionaire. It wasn't just about a contract or a child. It was about two broken people who, against all odds, were finding pieces of themselves in each other. And as terrifying as it was, Emily knew there was no turning back. Winter came, blanketing the city in white. Snow fell gently outside the mansion windows, muffling the world into silence. Inside, fires roared in grand fireplaces, casting flickering warmth across the walls. For Emily, the season was both beautiful and suffocating. She was now in her final trimester. Every step was slower, every breath more labored, but she had never felt more fiercely protective of the life inside her. The baby shifted constantly, reminding her of the inevitable day ahead. And with each kick, Emily's resolve grew stronger. She couldn't give this child up without a fight. Alexander seemed to feel the urgency too. He was at her side more often, almost as if he couldn't stay away. Some days, his concern manifested as silence watching her from across the room, eyes clouded with thought. Other days, it was practical ordering softer chairs for her studio, making sure the kitchen staff prepared food she craved, rearranging his schedule to stay close. But it was his smallest actions that touched her most, like when he handed her a scarf before she even mentioned she was cold, or when he quietly adjusted the pillows behind her back while she pretended to sleep. These gestures spoke louder than any declaration, and yet the contract loomed between them like a ghost. One evening, Emily sat by the fire, sketching idly in her notebook. Alexander joined her, glass of scotch in hand. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She hesitated, then turned the notebook toward him. A small child, curly-haired, holding hands with two figures, a man and a woman. Alexander stared at it, his throat tightening. "That's us." Emily's heart raced. "I don't know why I drew it. Maybe it's just what I wish for." Has reticons of the Clive spider life. Silence stretched between them, heavy and dangerous. Finally, Alexander set his glass down. "And if I wished for the same thing?" Her breath caught. She wanted to believe him. She wanted it more than anything. But doubt gnawed at her. "You'd have to choose it. Not as a business deal. Not out of obligation. Out of love." His eyes burned into hers, raw and unguarded. "Then maybe that's exactly what I'm choosing." Emily's chest ached so deeply it felt like breaking. The next day, Dr. Patel visited for another check. After the exam, she pulled Alexander aside while Emily rested. "You need to prepare," Dr. Patel said firmly. "This isn't just about logistics anymore. Emily's attachment is strong. If you're not honest with her, if you take the child without considering her, you'll destroy her." Alexander's jaw clenched. "You think I don't know that? Then what do you intend to do?" the doctor pressed. For once, Alexander had no answer. That night, he found Emily awake, sitting on the balcony wrapped in a blanket. Snowflakes clung to her hair, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "You shouldn't be out here," he murmured, draping his coat over her shoulders. Emily looked up at him, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I don't know how to stop loving this baby." His chest tightened painfully. He sat beside her, the silence heavy with everything neither of them could say. Finally he spoke, voice rough. "Maybe you don't have to." She turned sharply. "What do you mean?" Alexander's eyes held hers, burning with intensity. "I thought I wanted control. I thought I wanted an heir, nothing more. But every time I see you with this child, our child, I realize I was wrong." Emily's heart pounded. "So what are you saying?" He exhaled, as though the words cost him everything. "I don't want to take this baby from you. I want us to raise it, together." Her breath caught, tears spilling over. For the first time, hope surged in her chest, fragile but real. The following days were different. Emily smiled more. She painted brighter scenes again, sunrises, meadows, children laughing. Alexander joined her in the studio sometimes, watching with quiet fascination as her brush brought life to canvas. They began to speak openly about the future, not in contracts or obligations, but in possibilities. "What if it's a boy?" Alexander asked one evening. "Then he'll be stubborn like you," Emily teased. "And if it's a girl?" Emily smiled softly. "Then she'll be fierce like me." For the first time, laughter filled the mansion, not hollow, not forced, but genuine. But hope always carries shadows. One night, Emily woke to sharp pains in her stomach. Panic gripped her as she doubled over, clutching her belly. Alexander rushed in within seconds, his face ashen. "What's happening?" I don't know," Emily gasped. He didn't hesitate. He scooped her into his arms, shouting for the car. Within minutes, they were racing through snow-covered streets to the hospital, his grip on her hand iron tight. At the hospital, doctors swarmed. Emily was wheeled away, leaving Alexander pacing like a caged animal. For hours, he waited helpless, terrified, stripped of all control. Finally, Dr. Patel emerged. "She's stable," the doctor said gently. "False labor, stress-induced, but she and the baby are safe." Alexander's knees nearly buckled with relief. When he entered Emily's room, she was pale but awake, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "You scared me," he admitted, his voice raw. Emily gave a weak smile. "I scared myself." He sank into the chair beside her bed, taking her hand in his without hesitation. "I realized something tonight," he said hoarsely. She squeezed his hand. "What?" "That I can lose everything, money, power, legacy. But not you, not this child, not us." Tears filled Emily's eyes. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe in his words, because in that moment, she knew Alexander Carter wasn't just a man who had bought her womb. He was a man who might, against all odds, love her. The scare at the hospital had changed everything. For Alexander, it stripped away the last layers of denial he clung to. The idea that this was merely a transaction was gone. He had faced the possibility of losing Emily and the child, and it had shaken him more than any boardroom loss ever could. For Emily, the experience deepened her resolve. She knew now, without doubt, that the baby wasn't something she could hand over and walk away from. It was life, it was love, it was hers. The mansion, once cold and intimidating, now felt like a fragile cocoon holding their uncertain future. Emily's days grew slower as her body prepared for the final stage. The staff became more attentive, the air thick with anticipation. Alexander, though, never left her side for long. His once constant meetings were now rare, pushed aside in favor of being near her. At first, Emily teased him about hovering. "You're supposed to be a billionaire tycoon, not my shadow," she laughed one morning as he carried her tea into the studio. Alexander smirked faintly. "Even billionaires can prioritize." She raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly are you prioritizing?" His eyes softened, lingering on her. "You," the simple word, unraveled her. But peace never lasts forever. One evening, while Emily was resting in her room, Alexander received a visitor in his study, an old associate, Victor Hale. Victor was sharp, charming, and ruthless, the kind of man who thrived in Alexander's world of business wars. "I hear rumors," Victor began smoothly, pouring himself a drink without asking, "about you playing house with some street girl." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Careful," Victor chuckled. "Don't be so touchy. I just find it fascinating." Alexander Carter, the man who swore never to get tied down, now hiding away with a pregnant woman. "Tell me, is it true?" Alexander's silence was answer enough. Victor leaned forward, smirking. "Do you realize what this makes you look like? Weak, distracted, vulnerable. The wolves will circle, my friend." Alexander's voice dropped like steel. "Let them. I'll destroy anyone who comes near her." Victor's smile faded slightly, recognizing the seriousness in his tone, but his eyes glittered with curiosity. "So it's true. You actually care for her?" Alexander didn't respond. He didn't have to. His silence was louder than any confession. Emily, unaware of the conversation, spent her evening sketching. She drew the mansion, the garden, the city skyline, but most of all, she drew the child over and over until her notebook was filled with images of small hands, tiny feet, bright eyes she hadn't yet seen. When Alexander returned to her side, she looked up at him. "You've been gone longer than usual." "Business," he said curtly, not wanting to worry her with Victor's intrusion. But Emily, always perceptive, caught the flicker of tension in his eyes. She didn't press him yet. The following days were filled with preparations. Dr. Patel visited more often, monitoring both Emily and the baby closely. Bags were packed for the hospital. The nursery, once a sterile, impersonal room Alexander had ordered designed, began to take on touches of warmth because Emily had insisted on painting the walls herself, soft colors blooming under her brush. Alexander watched her work, leaning against the doorway. "You're stubborn," he remarked. "Someone has to be," she replied with a smile. He shook his head, but his eyes were full of admiration. One snowy night, unable to sleep, Emily found herself sitting by the fire. Alexander joined her, a blanket draped over his arm. "You'll catch cold," he said, placing it gently around her shoulders. She looked at him, her heart aching with unspoken words. "Do you ever regret it, choosing me for this?" His gaze locked on hers, unwavering. "Never." Emily's breath hitched. "Even if it ruins your reputation?" A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Reputation is smoke. You and this child are real." Tears filled her eyes, spilling before she could stop them. She whispered, "I'm scared, Alexander. Scared that when the baby comes, you'll change your mind. That you'll remember this was supposed to be business and send me away." His expression softened in a way she had never seen before. He reached for her hand, holding it firmly. "Emily, listen to me. You are not disposable. Not to me. Not ever." Her heart cracked open at his words. For the first time, she allowed herself to lean into his embrace, letting the walls around her crumble completely. But storms brew quietly before they break. A week later, Victor returned, this time uninvited. Emily, wandering the halls, overheard fragments of the conversation in Alexander's study. "You can't let this continue, Carter. A woman like her, she'll drag you down." Emily froze, her stomach twisting painfully. Alexander's voice, sharp and unyielding, cut through. "If you ever speak about her that way again, we're done. Permanently." He's had the stilt of the Davridid and I things. "The Davridid of the Comphilim," Victor laughed mockingly. "So it's true. You've gone soft." Emily's breath caught. She pressed a hand to her stomach and backed away silently, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to run into the room, to defend herself, to prove she wasn't a liability. But another part whispered that Victor's words might be true. What if she was dragging Alexander down? That night, as she lay in bed, Emily couldn't sleep. Doubt gnawed at her. Love was new to her, fragile, untested, and Alexander, despite his promises, belonged to a world she didn't understand. She whispered into the darkness, her hand resting on her belly, "Will we ever belong here?" He wanted a 795 to a act of the servant, the why than business. He wanted the 7. "I want to received and now count to the crewment." The baby kicked softly, as if answering. Meanwhile, Alexander stood alone in his study, staring out at the snow-covered city. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, no longer the ruthless tycoon, but a man who had something to lose. And for the first time, Alexander Carter understood the terrifying truth. He wasn't afraid of business rivals, or scandals, or power slipping from his grasp. He was afraid of losing Emily. The night the storm broke, Emily woke with sharp, undeniable pains. This time, it wasn't a false alarm. Her cries brought Alexander racing into the room. The sight of her doubled over, clutching her stomach, turned his blood to ice. "It's happening," she gasped, her face pale. Without hesitation, Alexander scooped her into his arms and shouted for the driver. Snow lashed against the windows as the car sped through the night, every second stretching like eternity. Emily clung to his hand, her knuckles white. "Don't let go," she whispered. "I won't," he vowed, his voice breaking. "Not now, not ever." The hospital was a blur of lights, voices, and rushing feet. Doctors surrounded Emily, guiding her swiftly into the delivery room. Alexander tried to follow, but a nurse blocked him. "Sir, you can't be in here." "I'm not leaving her," he roared, his voice cracking with desperation. Emily turned her head weakly, her eyes finding his. "It's okay, I'll be fine." But the look in her eyes begged him to stay close. The nurse hesitated. Then, perhaps recognizing the raw terror in his face, she relented. "Fine, but stay out of the way." The hours that followed tested every ounce of Emily's strength. Each contraction tore through her like fire. Sweat soaked her skin. Tears streaked her cheeks. Alexander stood by her side, gripping her hand, whispering words he never thought he'd say. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known. Sen sie vernatit. Have seaman. Good of the pastor man. Ten sie violas catly. You can do this. I love you." The last words slipped out in the chaos, raw and unguarded. Emily's heart jolted, even through the pain. She clung to them, drawing strength. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a baby's cry pierced the air. Emily collapsed back against the pillows, sobbing with relief. The doctor lifted a tiny, wriggling form and announced, "It's a girl. It's—" Alexander's breath caught. He stared in awe as the nurse placed the baby in Emily's arms. She was perfect, tiny fists waving, dark eyes blinking at the world for the first time. Emily's tears fell freely. "Hello, my love," she whispered to the child. Alexander leaned close, his hand trembling as he brushed a fingertip against the baby's cheek. Emotion swelled in his chest, fierce and overwhelming. "Our daughter," he murmured, the words reverent. But as beautiful as the moment was, shadows still lingered. Emily looked at him, fear flickering in her tired eyes. "What happens now?" "The contract. Your reputation. All of it." Alexander silenced her with a kiss to her forehead. "Forget the contract. Forget the world. None of it matters. Only you. Only her." Tears welled in Emily's eyes again, but this time they were tears of hope. News of the birth spread quickly. Victor was among the first to send a pointed message. "Congratulations on your downfall." Alexander read it once, then deleted it without reply. For the first time, he didn't care. He wasn't a man defined by his empire anymore. He was a father, and, though he hadn't yet said it aloud in the light of day, he was a man in love. Days passed, filled with sleepless nights and tender moments. Emily, though exhausted, glowed with a radiance Alexander had never seen before. She rocked the baby gently, humming soft lullabies. Sometimes she caught Alexander watching them with an expression so raw it left her breathless. One evening, as snow fell silently outside, Alexander entered the nursery to find Emily asleep in the rocking chair, the baby nestled against her chest. He approached quietly, gazing at the two of them. His heart swelled with something he had no words for. In that moment, he knew his life had changed forever, and he would never go back. When Emily awoke, she found him still sitting nearby, the baby now cradled in his arms. He looked almost vulnerable, staring down at the tiny bundle. "She's so small," he whispered, "and yet she holds everything that matters." "Watching this long of the longest," Emily's heart melted. She reached out, touching his hand. "We'll figure it out, won't we?" He met her gaze, his eyes fierce with determination. "We already are." Weeks turned into months. The mansion, once a symbol of cold isolation, now rang with laughter and soft cries. Emily painted again this time, portraits of their daughter, capturing every smile, every curious glance. Alexander began to step back from his ruthless pursuits. Deals that once consumed him now seemed insignificant compared to bedtime stories and morning giggles. Victor tried again to lure him back into the old world of power games, but Alexander shut the door firmly. "I have everything I need," he said simply. One spring morning, the three of them walked through the garden. Flowers bloomed where snow once lay, the air alive with new beginnings. Emily carried the baby, her smile radiant. Alexander walked beside her, his hand resting gently on her back. As they paused beneath the old oak tree, Alexander turned to her. "There's something I need to say." Emily looked up, her heart racing. "I never planned for this. I never thought I was capable of it. But I was wrong." His eyes burned with sincerity. "I love you, Emily, not because of the baby, not because of the deal we made, but because you are the one person who changed everything for me." Tears filled her eyes, spilling freely. "And I love you," she whispered. "I think I did from the moment you looked at me like I mattered." Alexander cupped her face, kissing her with a tenderness that sealed every unspoken promise. Their daughter gurgled softly in Emily's arms, as if blessing the moment. From that day forward, they were no longer bound by contracts or fear. They were bound by love, by family, by a future they would build together. The billionaire who once believed he could buy everything had finally learned the one truth. The seasons turned, as they always did. Winter's snow gave way to spring blossoms, then to the warm hum of summer, and later to the crisp winds of autumn. With each passing season, Emily and Alexander discovered new rhythms, new joys, and new challenges that reshaped what family meant to them. The mansion, once a fortress of cold marble and silence, now breathed with life. Sunlight spilled through open windows, carrying the sound of baby laughter through halls that had long been barren of warmth. Staff who once walked stiffly through the house now smiled easily, as if the joy of the family had infected every corner of the estate. Emily's art flourished in ways she had never imagined. Her sketches and paintings, once private and hidden, now captured the story of her new life. The gallery in the East Wing, once a sterile space Alexander had commissioned for prestige, was filled with her work. Tender portraits of their daughter, bright landscapes of gardens she had once wandered in solitude, and vivid abstractions of emotions too deep for words. Critics who came to view the collection found themselves unexpectedly moved. What they didn't know, what only Alexander and Emily understood, was that every canvas was a love letter to their child, to each other, to the life they were building. Alexander changed too. The man who had once been defined by ruthless ambition found new strength in gentleness. He still ran his empire. Yes, Carter Industries continued to thrive, but he no longer bled himself dry for power. Meetings were cut short, so he could be home in time for bedtime stories. Business trips were carefully weighed against the cost of missing a milestone in his daughter's life. His board of directors murmured about the shift at first, worried that the sharp edge of their leader had dulled. But then they saw something different, a man who made decisions with clarity, balance, and purpose. He had traded obsession for wisdom, and the empire grew stronger because of it. But it was in the small, ordinary moments that the truth of their transformation shone brightest. Morning sunlight spilling across the kitchen table as Emily fed their daughter bits of fruit while Alexander sipped coffee, his tie half knotted. Laughter echoing across the garden as the little girl toddled unsteadily toward her father's open arms. Quiet evenings where Emily painted while Alexander read nearby, the baby asleep between them in a crib they kept close, unwilling to let her out of sight. These were the moments that couldn't be bought, bargained for, or scripted. They were real, and they were everything. Yet, even with happiness surrounding them, Emily sometimes woke in the night, haunted by echoes of the past, the fear of losing the baby, the contract that had once defined her, the uncertainty of her place in Alexander's world. One such night, unable to sleep, she slipped out onto the balcony. The city stretched before her, glittering under the moonlight. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, whispering to herself, "How did I get here? From the streets to this." A warm hand touched hers. She turned to see Alexander standing beside her, his eyes filled with quiet understanding. "You still doubt it sometimes, don't you?" he asked gently. She didn't answer at first, but then she nodded. "I used to think I was disposable, that once the deal was done, I'd be sent away." Alexander's jaw tightened. He turned her to face him fully, his hands framing her face. "Emily, listen to me. You were never disposable. Not then, not now, not ever. You are the best choice I've ever made." Tears filled her eyes as she leaned into his embrace. The last of her doubts, the shadows that clung stubbornly to her heart, began to fade. As their daughter grew, so too did their love. She became the thread weaving them tighter, but the bond between Alexander and Emily was no longer dependent on her alone. It had become its own force, steady, unshakable. On the day of their daughter's first birthday, the mansion hosted a celebration unlike any it had ever seen. Friends, family, and even some of Alexander's most skeptical associates gathered in the garden. Balloons floated, Laughter rang out, and Emily found herself overwhelmed by the sight. Once, she had stood alone in the rain, invisible to the world. Now, she stood surrounded by life, love, and belonging. When the candles were blown out, Alexander slipped an arm around her waist. "You've given me more than I ever thought possible," he whispered. She smiled, her heart swelling. "We gave it to each other. As the speaks of Somli Inusari, he have setiet, he have see once of Sarum, subscribe to me, he have serve had, in the drantry of the axe of the." Years later, the mansion would bear little resemblance to the fortress it had once been. Children's drawings covered the fridge, Emily's paintings lined the halls, a swing hung from the great oak tree in the garden, and Alexander Carter, the man who had once believed money was the only thing worth having, would be remembered not for the fortune he built, but for the family he cherished. The story of Emily and Alexander was not one of contracts or deals, but of transformation, of two broken people who found wholeness not in wealth or power, but in love. And as the sun set one evening, casting golden light over the mansion, Emily sat on the balcony with their daughter curled in her lap and Alexander's arm wrapped firmly around her shoulders. She whispered, half to herself, half to them, "We're home." And for the first time, she truly believed it, that money could never purchase a heart that loves freely. And in Emily, and in the child they held between them, Alexander Carter had found it,